The notification sound from my phone made my heart skip, but not in a good way anymore. 3 months ago, those little pings from Ashton would send butterflies through my stomach. Now they felt like tiny alarm bells, warning me that my carefully constructed double life was starting to crack. Working late again tonight? Axton's voice drifted from the kitchen doorway as I quickly swiped the message away. My husband stood there holding our daughter Isabelle's backpack, his brown eyes studying my face with an intensity that hadn't been there before. "You know how it is," I said, forcing my voice to stay light and casual. "The Peterson account is a nightmare, and Ashton needs all hands on deck." The lie rolled off my tongue so easily now that it almost felt like truth. Almost. Axton nodded slowly, but something in his expression made my skin prickle. "Right. Ashton." He set Isabelle's backpack down with deliberate care. "Funny thing though, Mireille. I called the office yesterday around 7 to see if you needed me to pick up dinner. They said everyone had left by 6. My mouth went dry, but I'd gotten good at thinking fast. "Oh, we went to that little cafe on 5th Street. You know how Ashton is about keeping the team fed during crunch time." I laughed, hoping it sounded natural. "Honestly, Axton, you're starting to sound paranoid. Are you checking up on me now?" "I'm not checking up on anyone." His voice stayed level, which somehow made it worse than if he'd gotten angry. "I was trying to be a considerate husband, but maybe that's the problem." Before I could ask what he meant, Isabelle wandered into the kitchen, her 8-year-old face scrunched with the particular brand of worry that kids get when they sense adult tension they can't understand. "Daddy, are you and Mommy fighting?" she asked in a small voice. "No, sweetheart," Axton said immediately, his whole demeanor shifting as he knelt down to her level. "Mommy and Daddy are just talking about work stuff, boring grown-up things." But I caught the way his eyes lingered on me over Isabelle's head, and the message was clear. We're not done with this conversation. The next morning brought a text from my mother-in-law, Helen, that made my stomach clench. "Coming by for lunch today. Want to see how you're all doing." Helen Vane had never liked me much, though she'd been polite enough over the years. But lately, her politeness had taken on a sharp edge that felt more like barely contained disapproval. She had that maternal radar that could detect when something was wrong with her precious son from 3 counties away. When she arrived at noon, perfectly put together in her navy blazer and pearls, despite being 62, I could practically feel her taking inventory of everything from the dishes in the sink to the tension lines around Axton's eyes. "You look tired, dear," she said to me over her chicken salad, but her tone suggested she thought I looked guilty rather than tired. "All this overtime must be exhausting." "It's temporary," I replied, stabbing my lettuce a little harder than necessary. "Once we close the Peterson deal, things will calm down." Helen's grey eyes, so much like Axton's, fixed on me with uncomfortable intensity. "And this Ashton person doesn't mind keeping you so late. Seems inconsiderate, especially with Isabelle needing her mother at home." The criticism stung because it hit too close to home. I had been missing bedtime stories and school events, but not for the reasons Helen thought. Ashton appreciates dedicated employees. Some of us actually care about our careers. "Of course," Helen said smoothly, "though I've always believed that family should come first. Don't you agree, Axton?" My husband looked up from his sandwich, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. "I think everyone has to find their own balance," he said carefully. After Helen left, the house felt different somehow. Smaller. Like the walls were pressing in on secrets that were getting too big to contain. That evening, I was in our bedroom changing out of my work clothes when I heard Axton's voice from downstairs, low and serious. He was on the phone with someone, and while I couldn't make out the words, the tone made my pulse quicken. I crept to the top of the stairs, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. "Just feels like I don't know her anymore, Simon," he was saying to his brother. "The late nights, the secrecy with her phone, the way she gets defensive about everything." My heart hammered against my ribs. How much did he suspect? How much did he actually know? I don't want to be that husband, Axton continued, the one who goes through his wife's things or follows her around. But something's not right, and I can feel it in my bones. I backed away from the stairs, my mind racing. This was getting dangerous. I needed to be smarter, more careful. Maybe I should cool things off with Ashton for a while, just until Axton's suspicions died down. But even as I thought it, my phone buzzed with another message from Ashton. "Miss you already. Tomorrow can't come fast enough." Despite everything, the risk, the guilt, the growing web of lies, I felt that familiar flutter of excitement. Ashton made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years, desired, special. Like I was more than just Axton's wife or Isabelle's mother or the HR assistant who processed everyone else's paperwork. I typed back quickly, "Miss you too, same time tomorrow." His response came immediately. "Always." I deleted the conversation and put my phone face down on the dresser, but I could still feel it there like a ticking bomb. When Axton came upstairs 20 minutes later, I was already in bed pretending to read a magazine. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Just tired," I said without looking up. "Long day." He nodded and started getting ready for bed, but I could feel him watching me in the mirror as he brushed his teeth. When he finally turned off the lights and settled beside me, the space between us felt like an ocean. I lay awake long after his breathing evened out, staring at the ceiling and wondering how I'd gotten to this point. 3 months ago, the flirtation with Ashton had seemed so innocent. Just harmless fun with an attractive, successful man who actually noticed me, who made me laugh and told me I was brilliant and beautiful. Now I was lying to my husband every day, sneaking around like a teenager, and watching my daughter withdraw more and more as the tension in our house grew thicker. But I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. The next morning, Isabelle barely touched her breakfast. She sat at the kitchen table, pushing her cereal around with her spoon. Her dark eyes, so much like her father's, darting between Axton and me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Not hungry, baby?" I asked, reaching over to feel her forehead. She shrugged, a gesture that seemed far too old for her 8 years. "My tummy feels funny." Axton and I exchanged a look, and for a moment we were united in our concern for our daughter. It was the first time we'd really looked at each other, actually looked, in weeks. "Maybe she should stay home today," he suggested. "I can't," I said automatically. "I have that presentation this morning, and Ashton is counting on me." The moment the words left my mouth, I saw Axton's jaw tighten. "Right, Ashton." "I could call in," I backpedaled quickly. "If she's really sick—" "No," Axton said, his voice flat. "Go to work, Mireille. Wouldn't want to disappoint Ashton." He took Isabelle's temperature, normal, and decided she was probably just having an off day. After he left to drop her at school, I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of our morning routine, and felt the weight of my choices settling around me like a shroud. My phone buzzed. Ashton again. "Can't wait to see you. Wear that blue dress I like." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Always thinking ahead, aren't you?" "Only when it comes to you," came his reply, followed by a winking emoji that made me smile despite everything. I deleted the conversation, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. But as I reached for the handle, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. My reflection looked back at me. 34 years old, still attractive, still vital. But there was something in my eyes that hadn't been there before. Something that looked suspiciously like fear. The office felt different when you were carrying secrets. Every glance from a coworker, every pause in conversation when I walked by, every whispered exchange by the coffee machine, it all felt loaded with meaning, whether it actually was or not. I'd been at Meridian Financial for 6 years, long enough to know how gossip traveled through the building like wildfire. And lately, I'd been feeling the heat. "Morning, Mireille," called Janet from accounting as I passed her desk. Her smile seemed a little too bright, her eyes a little too curious. "You're here early again." "Lots to catch up on," I replied, keeping my voice light. "You know how it is." But as I continued toward my cubicle, I heard her whisper to her desk mate, "She's been working a lot of overtime lately, hasn't she?" My cheeks burned. Were people talking? Had someone seen Ashton and me together? We'd been so careful, meeting at that little cafe across town, never staying late in the office at the same time, keeping our interactions professional during work hours. Well, mostly professional. I just settled at my desk when my computer chimed with an instant message from Ashton. "Good morning, beautiful. Coffee in 20?" My pulse quickened the way it always did when he reached out. 3 months of this, and he still had the power to make me feel like a giddy teenager with a crush. "Can't," I typed back. "People are starting to notice." "Starting to notice what?" "2 colleagues discussing work over coffee." "You know what I mean." There was a pause then. "My office. 10 minutes. We need to talk." Ashton Grant's office was on the executive floor. All glass walls and modern furniture that screamed success. As the head of business development, he commanded respect and a salary that was probably triple mine. When I knocked on his door, he waved me in with that easy smile that had first caught my attention at the company Christmas party. "Close the door," he said, and I felt that familiar flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. At 40, Ashton was everything Axton wasn't. Confident, ambitious, spontaneous. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his suits always immaculate, his cologne subtle but intoxicating. When he looked at me, I felt like the most important person in the room. "You seem tense," he said, standing up from behind his desk. "Everything okay at home?" The question sent a chill through me. "Why would you ask that?" "Just checking." He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "You mentioned Axton's been asking questions." "He's suspicious," I admitted. "Last night he was on the phone with his brother, talking about how I've been acting different, and his mother came by yesterday with her usual passive-aggressive routine." Ashton frowned. "Maybe we should cool things down for a while. Just until the heat dies down." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Cool things down?" "I'm not saying permanently," he said quickly, reaching for my hand. "Just strategically. I can't afford any complications right now, Mireille. The Peterson deal is worth millions to this company, and if there's even a hint of impropriety..." "Impropriety?" I pulled my hand away, stung. "Is that what this is to you?" "You know that's not what I meant." His voice took on that soothing tone he used when he wanted to calm me down. "You're important to me, Mireille. More important than you know. But we have to be smart about this." Before I could respond, there was a knock on his door. Through the glass wall, I could see his assistant hovering with a stack of files. "We should continue this later," Ashton said, already moving back toward his desk. "Maybe grab lunch somewhere off-site." I nodded, but something cold had settled in my stomach. The way he'd shifted gears so quickly, the casual mention of cooling things down, it made me wonder if I was more invested in this relationship than he was. The morning dragged by in a haze of routine tasks and paranoid observations. Every time someone walked past my cubicle, I wondered if they knew. When my phone rang, and it was Axton asking if I could pick up Isabelle from school because he had a client meeting, I found myself analyzing his tone for hidden meanings. "Of course," I said. "Everything okay?" "Just busy," he replied. "Thanks, Mireille. I owe you one." The casual affection in his voice made my chest tight with guilt. Here was my husband, still trying to be a team player, still assuming the best of me, while I sat in my office planning secret lunch dates with another man. At noon, I met Ashton at Romano's, a little Italian place 20 minutes from the office. He was already seated in a corner booth when I arrived, checking his phone with a distracted expression. "Sorry I'm late," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Traffic was murder." He looked up, but his smile seemed forced. "No problem. I ordered you the Caesar salad. That's what you usually get, right? It wasn't, but I didn't correct him. Thanks. We made small talk about work for a few minutes, but there was an awkwardness that hadn't been there before. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. Are you having second thoughts? I asked bluntly. Ashton set down his fork and looked at me seriously. About us? No. About the situation? Maybe. What situation? Leela's been asking questions, he said quietly. About why I've been working so much, why I seem distracted. She's not stupid, Mireille. None of our spouses are. The mention of his wife sent an uncomfortable jolt through me. I'd seen Lila Grant at company functions, tall, elegant, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from breeding and education. Everything I wasn't. What kind of questions? The kind that make me think she might be paying more attention than I realized. He reached across the table and took my hand. Look, I care about you. You know that. But I also have a lot to lose here. And I don't. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. I have a husband and a daughter, Ashton. I have just as much at stake as you do. I know. He squeezed my hand. I'm not trying to minimize what you're risking. I just think we need to be more careful. Maybe take a break from the lunch dates. Keep things strictly professional at work for a while. I stared at him, feeling something crumble inside my chest. So that's it. We just pretend nothing happened. It's not forever, he said quickly, just until things calm down. But I could see it in his eyes, the retreat, the self-preservation instinct kicking in. Ashton Grant hadn't gotten where he was by taking unnecessary risks, and I was starting to feel very much like an unnecessary risk. I should get back, I said, pulling my hand away. Mireille, don't be like this. Like what? Disappointed? Hurt? I stood up, my appetite completely gone. Don't worry, Ashton. I get the message loud and clear. I left him sitting there and drove back to the office in a fog of anger and humiliation. How had I been so stupid? How had I convinced myself that a man like Ashton Grant would actually risk his career and his marriage for someone like me? The afternoon passed in a blur of mindless tasks and growing dread. By the time I left to pick up Isabelle, I felt like I was walking through quicksand, every step pulling me deeper into a mess of my own making. Isabelle was quiet on the drive home, staring out the window with that distant expression she'd been wearing more and more lately. How was school today, baby? I asked, trying to inject some normalcy into my voice. Okay, she said without looking at me. Just okay. Did you have art class today? I know you love art class. She shrugged. Mrs. Peterson asked me if everything was all right at home. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What did you tell her? That everything was fine. Isabelle finally looked at me, her dark eyes serious beyond her years. But it's not, is it, Mummy? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. What do you mean, sweetheart? You and Daddy don't laugh anymore. And you're always on your phone, and Daddy gets that sad look when he thinks nobody's watching. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but I could hear the worry underneath. Are you going to get divorced like Tommy's parents? I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, my heart breaking at the fear in my daughter's voice. No, baby. Daddy and I are just going through a rough patch. All married people do sometimes. It doesn't mean we don't love each other, or that we don't love you. But even as I said the words, they felt hollow. Because the truth was, I didn't know what Axton and I were anymore. I'd been so caught up in the excitement of my affair with Ashton that I'd barely thought about what I was doing to my marriage, to my family. When we got inside, Axton was already home, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and papers spread everywhere. The investigation. How'd the client meeting go? I asked, trying to sound normal. Fine, he said without looking up. Just catching up on some paperwork. But as I moved closer, I could see the papers weren't work-related. Phone bills, credit card statements, bank records. My mouth went dry. What's all this? I asked, keeping my voice casual. Finally, he looked up, and the expression in his eyes made my blood run cold. Just checking some things, making sure our finances are in order. Why? Is something wrong? I don't know, Mireille. His voice was quiet, controlled. Is there? We stared at each other across the kitchen table, standing on opposite sides of a chasm growing wider by the second. Upstairs, I heard Isabelle's bedroom door close. She was hiding from the tension that filled our house like smoke. I'm going to start dinner, I said finally, because I couldn't think of anything else. Axton nodded and went back to his papers, but I could feel him watching as I moved around the kitchen. Every movement felt calculated, performed, like I was an actor playing the role of wife and mother, while my real self remained hidden behind layers of lies and deception. I knew what he was doing with those statements. Axton was an accountant. Numbers were his language, patterns his specialty. He was building a case, documenting anomalies, tracking inconsistencies, every unexplained cash withdrawal, every lunch that cost more than it should, every hotel charge that didn't quite make sense. He was creating a timeline of my deception, one receipt at a time. I'd been so careful about the big things, never using our joint account for hotel rooms, always paying cash when I could, but I'd gotten sloppy with the small expenses. A $47 lunch at a restaurant across town when I'd told him I was eating at my desk. Parking garage fees downtown on days I'd claimed to be working from home. The $200 cash withdrawal last Tuesday that I'd said was for Isabelle's school fundraiser, even though the fundraiser wasn't until next month. Each small lie, insignificant on its own, was now being compiled into a comprehensive picture of betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I saw Axton's eyes flick toward the sound. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and glanced at the screen. It was from Ashton. I'm sorry about lunch. Can we talk? I quickly deleted the message and put the phone away, but not before I caught the look on Axton's face. Suspicion, hurt, and something else that made my stomach clench with fear. Determination. Who was that? He asked, his tone deliberately casual. Just work stuff, nothing important. Nothing important that you had to delete immediately. My hand stilled over the cutting board where I'd been chopping vegetables. I didn't delete it, I just cleared the notification. Right. He made a note on one of his papers, and I realized with growing horror that he was documenting this too. The deleted text, my defensive response, the exact time, and my visible anxiety. Axton, what are you doing? What I should have done months ago. He looked up at me, and there was no anger in his expression, just a cold, analytical focus that was somehow worse. I'm gathering information, making sure I understand the full scope of our financial situation before I make any major decisions. What kind of decisions? The kind that require accurate information. He tapped his pen against the credit card statement. For instance, I need to know if my wife has been spending our money on things she doesn't want me to know about. I need to understand why there are charges from hotels we've never stayed at, restaurants we've never visited together, parking garages in neighborhoods she has no business being in. Each word was like a scalpel, precise and cutting. I wanted to defend myself, to explain, but every explanation would require another lie, and I could see he was waiting for that, ready to document my attempts at deception. I can explain those charges, I said weakly. Can you? He pulled out a highlighted page. Then please explain the Marriott downtown. 3 separate charges over the past 2 months, always on Thursday afternoons, always for approximately 4 hours. My mind raced. Thursdays were my regular meetings with Ashton, the standing project review sessions that had become our cover story. But how could I explain hotel charges without admitting what we'd been doing there? Those were 4, I started, then stopped, realizing I had no plausible lie ready. Take your time, Axton said, his voice still terrifyingly calm. I'm sure you'll think of something creative. You always do. The sarcasm stung because it was accurate. I'd been creative with my lies, spinning elaborate explanations for simple questions, building a false narrative to explain away my absences and expenses. But I hadn't counted on Axton's methodical nature, his accountant's mind that saw patterns in numbers that most people would miss. I'd underestimated my own husband, treated him like an obstacle to work around, rather than a partner who deserved honesty. "I think," he said, gathering his papers into a neat stack, "you should take some time to think about whether you want to keep lying to me or whether you're ready to have an honest conversation about what's really been going on." He stood up, leaving me alone in the kitchen with half-prepared dinner and the crushing weight of my own deception. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard him stop outside Isabelle's room, heard the soft murmur of their voices as he checked on our daughter. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Ashton. "Please, Mireille, we need to figure this out." But there was nothing to figure out anymore. The walls were closing in, my careful lies unraveling, and my husband was building a case against me with the same careful attention to detail he brought to his most important client accounts. I deleted Ashton's message and blocked his number, knowing it was too little, too late. The evidence was already gathered. The pattern was already clear. And Axton was done asking questions he already knew the answers to. Sunday dinner at Romano's had been a vain family tradition for years, but tonight felt different. Helen had insisted on the gathering, claiming she wanted to check in on everyone, but I could sense an agenda lurking beneath her cheerful phone call. The restaurant buzzed with the usual weekend crowd as we settled into our reserved table. Helen, Axton's younger brother Simon, Axton, Isabelle, and me. The forced normalcy of it all made my skin crawl. "You look lovely tonight, Mireille," Helen said as we reviewed our menus, but her tone suggested she thought the opposite. "That dress is interesting." It was the blue dress Ashton had complimented, and I'd worn it deliberately, like armor against the growing suspicion in my husband's eyes. "Thank you," I replied smoothly. "Axton picked it out, didn't you, honey?" Axton glanced up from his menu, and I saw the flicker of confusion cross his face. He hadn't picked out the dress. I'd bought it specifically because Ashton had mentioned loving blue on me, but he just nodded politely and went back to studying his options. Simon, 30 and perpetually single, was scrolling through his phone with the distracted air of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "So, Mireille," he said without looking up, "Axton says you've been working crazy hours lately. Must be some project." The way he said it made my spine stiffen. "The Peterson account has been demanding, yes." "Right, the Peterson account." Simon finally looked at me, his eyes, so similar to Axton's and Helen's, holding a challenge I didn't like. "Funny thing, I ran into Dave Peterson at the gym last week. He mentioned the deal closed 2 weeks ago." The blood drained from my face. "What?" "Yeah, he was really happy about it. Said your company did great work, got everything wrapped up ahead of schedule." Simon's smile was sharp. "So I guess all those late nights paid off." I felt trapped, like a deer in headlights. Around the table I could feel everyone watching me. Helen with barely concealed satisfaction, Axton with growing suspicion, even Isabelle with those two knowing 8-year-old eyes. "There's always follow-up work," I said weakly. "Implementation, client services." "Of course," Helen said sweetly, "though it does seem like an awful lot of overtime for follow-up work, especially for someone in HR." The criticism stung because it was accurate. I was an HR assistant, not a project manager. My involvement in the Peterson account had been minimal at best, just another lie I'd built to cover my meetings with Ashton. "Well, some of us actually care about our careers," I snapped, my temper flaring. "Some of us don't just coast by on family connections and trust funds." The silence that followed was deafening. Helen's face went white, then red. Simon set down his phone with deliberate care. Axton closed his eyes like he was praying for patience. "Mireille," he said quietly, "that was uncalled for." Was it? I could feel myself spiraling, but I couldn't stop. 3 months of lies and stress and guilt were bubbling up, and I needed someone to blame. I'm tired of being judged by people who've never had to work for anything in their lives. Work for what? Simon asked, his voice dangerously quiet. A marriage? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been working pretty hard to destroy yours. Simon, Axton warned, but his brother wasn't finished. I mean, come on, Axton. The late nights, the phone calls, the attitude. When are you going to stop making excuses for her and see what's right in front of your face? That's enough, Axton said firmly, but I could see the doubt in his eyes, the growing certainty that his family might be right about me. No, let him talk, I said, my voice getting louder. I'd love to hear what Simon thinks he knows about my marriage. I know that my brother deserves better than a wife who treats him like he's boring and predictable, Simon shot back. I know that Isabelle shouldn't have to tiptoe around her own house because Mommy's always on edge and Daddy's always worried. Simon, please, Helen said, glancing around at the other diners who were starting to stare. But I was beyond caring about public scenes. Oh, that's rich coming from someone who's never been married, never had kids, never had any real responsibilities. It's easy to judge when you're living in your bachelor pad playing video games and hooking up with random women. At least I'm not cheating on my spouse, Simon said quietly. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I felt the colour drain from my face, felt Axton go very still beside me, felt Isabelle's confused gaze darting between the adults. I'm not, I started, but my voice came out as a croak. Aren't you? Simon's eyes were hard. Because I've got a friend who works security at your building. Says he's seen you in the parking garage with your boss plenty of times. Real cozy conversations for two people just discussing work. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. That's ridiculous. Ashton and I work together. Of course we... Ashton. Axton's voice was barely above a whisper. Your boss's name is Ashton. I realized my mistake immediately. I'd been so careful never to mention Ashton by name at home, always referring to him as my boss or the department head. But in my panic, I'd slipped. Yes, Ashton Grant. He's the head of business development. Axton was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. You've been working late with Ashton Grant. It's not what you're thinking, I said desperately. We're colleagues, that's all. This is insane. You're all acting like I've committed some crime because I take my job seriously. But even as I said it, I could hear how hollow it sounded, how defensive, how guilty. Can we please just order dinner? Helen said quietly, clearly trying to salvage what was left of the evening. Isabelle doesn't need to hear this. I looked at my daughter, who was staring at her place setting with the intense concentration of a child trying to disappear. Her small hands were folded in her lap, her shoulders hunched, and I felt a stab of guilt so sharp it nearly took my breath away. You're right, I said, forcing my voice to calm down. This is supposed to be a family dinner. We ordered our meals in strained silence, but the damage was done. The elephant was now sitting at our table, impossible to ignore. When the food came, none of us had much appetite. The chicken is good, I said to no one in particular, trying to inject some normalcy back into the evening. Helen agreed, but she was watching Axton, who hadn't touched his pasta. Simon kept checking his phone, and I wondered if he was texting someone about the drama he'd just unleashed. Isabelle picked at her pizza, stealing glances at her father's face. Daddy, are you okay? She asked finally, her small voice cutting through the tension. Axton looked up and managed a smile for his daughter. I'm fine, sweetheart, just thinking about work stuff. Boring grown-up things, she asked, echoing the phrase he'd used with her before. Something like that. After we paid the check and walked to our cars, Helen pulled me aside while Axton was buckling Isabelle into her car seat. I don't know what's going on with you, she said quietly, but whatever it is, you need to figure it out before you destroy that man completely. He loves you, Mireille. He's always loved you, even when the rest of us had our doubts. Don't make him regret that. There's nothing to figure out, I said automatically, but the words felt like ash in my mouth. Helen studied my face for a long moment. I hope that's true, for everyone's sake. The drive home was silent except for the radio playing softly and Isabelle's occasional comments about things she saw out the window. Axton's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, and I could practically hear the thoughts churning in his head. When we got home, Isabelle ran upstairs to her room, clearly eager to escape the adult tension. I started to follow Axton toward the kitchen, but he held up a hand to stop me. I need some air, he said without looking at me. I'm going for a walk. Axton, wait, we should talk about what happened tonight. Should we? He finally turned to face me, and the expression in his eyes made my chest tight. Because I'm not sure I'm ready to hear what you might tell me. He left through the back door, and I watched from the kitchen window as he walked slowly around our yard, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders bent like he was carrying a weight too heavy to bear. I pulled out my phone and, almost without thinking, typed a message to Ashton. We need to talk. Tonight was a disaster. His response came quickly. What happened? Axton's family knows. They're suspicious. I think Simon has been having us watched. There was a long pause, then. This is exactly what I was worried about. We need to be more careful. Careful? I typed back furiously. It's too late for careful. The cat's out of the bag. Not necessarily. If nothing physical happened, if it was just conversations. I stared at his message, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. Even now, even when everything was falling apart, Ashton was thinking about protecting himself first. Right, I typed. Just conversations. I deleted the thread and put my phone away, but the damage was done. I could see my situation clearly for the first time in months. I was risking everything for a man who would throw me under the bus the moment things got complicated. When Axton came back inside an hour later, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I hadn't touched. We need to talk, he said, settling into the chair across from me. I know. Are you having an affair? The question hung between us, simple and devastating. I could lie, I realized. I could deny everything, blame his family for being paranoid and jealous, gaslight him into doubting his own instincts. But looking at his face, at the pain and hope and fear all mixed together, I found I couldn't do it. It's not what you think, I said finally. What is it then? It's complicated. Axton laughed, but there was no humor in it. Complicated, right? He stood up, ran his hands through his hair. You know what's complicated, Mireille? Trying to figure out why my wife has been lying to me for months. Trying to explain to our daughter why Mommy and Daddy don't seem happy anymore. Trying to decide whether to believe my own eyes or keep making excuses for someone who clearly doesn't respect me enough to tell me the truth. I do respect you, I said desperately. Axton, you have to believe me. Nothing physical happened. We talked. He made me feel what? Important, valued, like I mattered. The words came out wrong, implying that Axton didn't make me feel those things. His face crumpled, and I realized I'd just delivered the killing blow to whatever trust remained between us. I see, he said quietly, and I don't make you feel important. That's not what I meant. No, I think it's exactly what you meant. He headed toward the stairs, then paused. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. I need some time to think. As his footsteps faded upstairs, I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our Sunday evening routine, and realized that everything I'd thought I wanted was turning to dust in my hands.